Welcome to the Human Resources for Small Business podcast, presented by Xenium HR. I'm your host, Brandon Laws. Whether you're an HR professional or a small business leader, each episode of this podcast is designed to bring you the latest in technical HR and leadership at your convenience. More content is available on our website at www.xeniumhr.com. Let's dive into today's topic. Hey, Brandon here, and welcome back for another episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Jeff Mike. He is the Vice President and HR Research Leader at Deloitte Consulting, LLP, and Deloitte had recently released a report entitled The Rise of Social Enterprise. And in this episode, we don't cover all of what the report covers because it's a lengthy report, and we'll put a link up to it. But we do cover a lot of the trends that they talk about in this report, and it's jam-packed with data and a lot of really great tips just based on where organizations are going. We talk about how organizations are really shifting from this business enterprise to a social enterprise, and I think you're really going to love what Jeff has to say. Give us a review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, wherever, or Stitcher, wherever you listen to the podcast, and make sure to subscribe so you get episodes every Tuesday as we release them. And thanks for listening. Hey, Jeff, great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Brandon.
So Deloitte released a report called The Rise of the Social Enterprise, and I guess I should just start out by asking you, what is a social enterprise?
Sure. Actually, Deloitte does an annual study called the Human Capital Trend Study, and so this year's version for 2008 is entitled The Rise of the Social Enterprise. And at the core of the social enterprise is this notion that, business is no longer just about dollars and cents or about organizations in a silo. It's about much broader thinking in terms of, how are you affecting or impacting the stakeholders in your ecosystem that may or may not be associated with just dollars and cents. So it's much broader than that.
And so what does it really mean to be a social enterprise? Like in terms of the way the organization behaves, maybe invests in its people, involved in the community, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so one of the points that this is grounded in is there was an open letter to CEOs from Larry Fink at BlackRock earlier this year. And the notion of, the social enterprise kind of stems from that. And really what he was saying in that letter is that a company's ability to manage environmental, social, and governance matters demonstrates the leadership and good governance that is so essential to sustainable growth. So it's going beyond, say, this notion of branding and community service or corporate social responsibility to really engaging in depth in the issues that are facing not only businesses but our societies and the stakeholders as well. And just to be more specific, the notion of really rather than an organization looking from the inside out. The organization's businesses are looking now from the outside in. What are the social factors? What are the economic factors? What are the environmental factors that they need to take into account in order to build sustainable growth and sustainable enterprises?
Early on in the introduction for the report, it talked about how organizations are really shifting from business enterprise to social enterprise. And I imagine that's what you mean by inside out versus outside in, is that business enterprise is probably looking at from the internal versus now they're really thinking about how does it impact the greater good from the outside. Is that kind of what I'm hearing, and why is that?
Yeah, so in the past years we've focused on inside what's happening inside organizations in terms of teams of teams or networks of teams, in terms of digital transformation, really looking at things like productivity from the inside or looking inside the organization out. Now that's shifted with all of the things that have happened in our environment, in our culture and society over the past year or so, including but not limited to things like Me Too, immigration issues, some of the things in terms of gun safety, in terms of the big issues that are facing us. because there's a lack of confidence in government, as identified by the Edelman Trust Survey, there's more confidence in businesses to be able to address these. So businesses are taking a bigger role in their communities and among their stakeholders, looking beyond their walls to how are they impacting, society and culture and we'll say their ecosystems on a broader level. So that's what we mean by that outside in look instead of the inside out look, which had been focused in previous years.
In doing the research for this report in particular, what size of organizations were you really looking at? And because I'm really curious where this trend is happening. Is it happening with the larger, enterprise level organizations, or is it really just happening across the board from the small business, medium size, all the way to enterprise?
Yeah, it's happening all across the board. So for this particular study, we had over 11,000 respondents across 124 countries. So that's, business leaders from around the world, from all sizes of organizations, were responding to our survey.
This report really dives deep in 10 trends that created an integrated view of the social enterprise. And I'd love to dive through all of them, but we don't have time for that. So I kind of cherry picked a few of the trends, and I was hoping we could dive through some of them.
Sure.
So trend number 1, I thought was a really good place to start, is the symphonic C-suite teams leading teams. So I wanted to ask you, what role do C-level execs, HR leaders, and individuals play as it relates to that trend number 1?
Sure. And I would highlight the data here. And I think it's really important that, 73% of the respondents said C-suite leaders rarely, if ever, work together, but on projects or strategic initiatives. 87% rated the C-suite collaboration as important or very important. And what that means is that these problems, these challenges, or these opportunities that we have are so fast moving and so complex that one perspective or one initiative alone isn't going to be able to address those issues. You need multiple perspectives to be able to address, what are the issues, what are the implications of, say, like a Me Too on not only your customer base but your workers, your employment brand, your overall corporate brand, governance. What does it mean in terms of big picture? And so, the C-suite, certainly the CEO and the C-level executives need to work together to bring these different perspectives to solve these more challenging problems and then move out on them in a coordinated way. Similar to what we talk about in terms of diversity and inclusion. In order to solve, more specific customer problems, you need these multiple perspectives and multiple resources moving towards, more challenging opportunities or problems in this society or in the ecosystem.
What's interesting to me about this trend number 1, it seems like you're really wanting to break down the silo effect that you have when you have somebody at the top of C level where they might just oversee a function, but they don't necessarily collaborate with these other functions in the organization. And I think that's what you sort of mean by teams leading teams is a collaborative effort at all levels. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's something that we've seen in our high impact human resources research and some of our other research, is that the more collaborative and integrated organizations are, the more effective they are at meeting business and workforce outcomes. And so, yes, we're pushing collaboration from top to bottom throughout the organization.
So trend number 3, I wanted to talk about this one. So new rewards, personalized, agile, and holistic. What's wrong with the way rewards are today in organizations?
What we talk about in terms of our rewards is best fit instead of best practice. And so for a long time, rewards has been kind of this, and there's still some validity to it. I'm not saying throw everything out. There's been this notion of, what is the market saying? What are a few of the offerings we can provide, and then what are we going to get the most bang for our buck out of? With this increasing focus on individualization and personalization and the employee experience, we're seeing a much more diverse set of expectations from different generations or different demographics in the workforce. And so the one size fits all, or even if it's a best practice, doesn't really work as well as something that's more focused on individual preferences, focused on what is the best fit for a given context and a given organization versus a best practice across an industry. For example, if you're trying to do salary surveys, and you're looking at an industry or one size organization as kind of a block, if you look at only kind of those larger trends, you're missing a lot of the nuances at the team or at the individual level that can actually have more impact on your workers than say something that's a little bit more broad or generalized.
So what's the best way to figure out what people really want? I mean, is it as simple as, in a one-on-one meeting, you're asking employees what kind of rewards that they value versus, the cookie cutter approach, like, oh, I'm going to get my health benefits and I'm going to get maybe some flexibility in my work. Like, what are you doing to really customize based on what people want today?
So we like to think about similar to the way employee engagement works. We'll do surveys, we'll do pulses, we'll do interviews and follow-ups for employee engagement. It's very similar in the reward space. Maybe not exactly the same type of implementation, because there's going to be different considerations. Rewards, for example, is probably a little more regulated than employee experience. But take a multifaceted kind of sensing approach and listening approach to your rewards offerings, rather than here's our annual rewards plan. We've done a few interviews. The numbers line up, so let's move forward. It's almost like, here's what we're offering. Give us your feedback. How can we adjust? What is more effective for you as an individual, or more effective for you as a team? So generally speaking, you want to do surveys. You want to do rewards optimization techniques. We want to do focus groups and other types of feedback. So I would say a multifaceted listening approach, as well as making sure within the bounds of rewards and regulation, being responsive to those.
So trend number 4, from careers to experiences, new pathways. Are the skills that individuals have today, are they going to be the skills of the future?
The skills of the future, it's hard to define what the skills of the future are. We can look at right now, half-life of skills is something like 2.5 years, which means that half of the skills that you learn now will be obsolete in 2.5 to 5 years. And so with things changing so rapidly, it's difficult to say, what are the skills going to be, or even competencies. What is going to be critical, though, is the ability to be able to learn on the job, to be able to apply what you're learning in your specific domain area, say it's marketing or software development or HR or finance. Because things are changing in those worlds so quickly, the key skill is going to be able to learn what the business needs, to be able to adapt and be able to apply what you're learning for a given context. And so, yes, there's value to specific skills-based learning. Learning a coding language or learning about digital marketing. But more importantly is the notion that these things are going to continue to evolve, and so your mindset has to be, they're going to continue to evolve, and I'm going to continue to grow as the field changes.
I think it's such a really good point, where we don't really know what the skills of the future are going to be needed, and so your point really is, we've got to learn, and we got to be nimble with the way things are going. And I'm really curious how organizations can play a role in making sure that their people get the skills that they need along the way. So what are organizations doing to make sure that their people are successful in the future?
Well, it's kind of a multifaceted approach in terms of learning. What we're seeing in a lot of our research is this notion of learning and work converging. And so it's important for organizations to be able to design, environments or work processes where that learning can happen kind of in the flow, as we're saying it. So, for example, a really basic example could be, making sure that there's the culture or the environment to ask questions, to do some experimentation, but also to make sure the learning tools are there as needed. And learning tools can be everything from micro content someone can look up real quickly to try to figure out something, or a dashboard of, say, customer feedback that says, okay, here's what's happening in your particular market or space right now, and what can you do to adjust and to address those needs as the market is evolving. And so again, I would say recognizing this convergence of learning and work, and then putting the learning and learning tools in the flow or in the process of the work as it's happening more specifically. And say a good example is, software developers or software tools have resources where, yes, you might be able to go pick up some code, but you might also be able to open a question about a particular object or a particular design. You can have you can have members of the community help you understand on how to apply maybe that certain section of code or that certain object in your application. And making those tools available as you're developing the software versus something you have to stop working, go research and then figure out how to put back into the work.
So how much of the career development and just learning process is really on the individual versus what the organization can do to provide them the tools that they need?
Career management is more and more owned by the individual.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
I think it's the organization's responsibility to make sure that those opportunities are available and cultivated. So it's not one or the other. I think they operate in tandem. Again, it's the individual has to take charge of their career and what they want to learn and grow in order to enhance productivity and retention. The organizations need to make sure that those opportunities and the context is there for the career development to happen.
Trend number 7 I wanted to talk about, it's well-being, a strategy and a responsibility. So how does well-being play a role in the success of our organizations? Is it more like just the right thing to do, or can it improve productivity and sustainability for the organizations long term?
Again, this is one of those things that goes beyond kind of the touchy-feely, be good to your people type things that we've been hearing about for a long time. This is actually, as we go beyond work-life balance into work-life integration, which may have been a term that you've heard before. What are you doing to make sure your people don't burn out? What are you doing to make sure they have the cognitive capacity to bring their best to the job versus just, grinding out more hours or grinding out more work? And so there's definitely, in terms of, taking care of your workers, that's not gone away, but the connections between productivity, between engagement, between retention are just that much more clear because we have more research and more ways to sense those sorts of things. And there's lots of vendors out there who are recognizing things like, overload on mobile devices, or time needed to disconnect and kind of refresh and maintain your intention. So there's a lot of vendors out there that are seeing this space as well, making it easier for organizations to really make sure their people, recognizing healthy people are more productive people, I would say.
Well-being is just a huge topic. Where should people start on that? I mean, it's it could be as far as making sure they don't burn out. It could be providing some resources. Like, where do you even think people should start if they really haven't put a focus on well-being?
I think just by recognizing that healthier people are going to be more productive people. I don't think that's a big secret, but we have some research on well-being providers. Actually, we've done a landscape of solution providers on well-being. I think, again, you want to think about the context of your organization. Where are the pain points? Understand and listen. Ask your workers and understand and listen. What are the challenges that they have in bringing their best or most productive selves to work? And one organization or even in one geography or one business might be very different than another. So it's not a really simple answer, but just by asking the questions, how and where can we improve well-being? Who is out there to help us think these things through? Like I said, there's a lot of solution providers as well who can share their perspectives to help you figure out where to start.
Trend number 8 is the one I want to end with. The hyper-connected workplace. Will productivity reign? What is, in your mind, the biggest challenge and changes with how we're connecting with each other at work? Is it making us more productive, more distracted, more burned out? Like, what's your perspective on just the hyper connectivity that we experience nowadays?
Yeah, it's interesting. Josh Burson used to share a graphic, and he still might, about productivity basically being flat since the Great Recession, 1.3% or something like that. Despite all of this really cool technology that we have to help us become more connected, I think the challenge is if these are disparate systems. I mean, we have probably 4 or 5 different collaboration platforms in our organization. And so determining what to use when in order to make sure things are getting done, people are collaborating and more productive is important. So I would say there's probably because of this proliferation of different technologies in the workplace, there's probably this sense of there's a sense of being overwhelmed where, okay, now I'm texting people from work. Does that imply an immediate response? Or maybe if I'm collaborating with a team, is an online platform or is a collaboration platform a better way to do this than texting? Email, we've heard about the tyrannies of email probably for a decade or so. Is that really the best way? So looking through all of these technologies, being critical, what are the ones that are going to help my teams be most effective? And maybe staying away a little bit from the hype, but maybe testing. We advocate for testing things on a small scale in organizations before you make them broader. Testing, specific technologies that will help, not pull us apart and make us committed to everybody, but will help us focus on the things that we need to do that are going to add the most value. That's probably, that's the way we would suggest to go.
Well said. So if people read this report, what do you want them to do as a result of this? It's jam-packed with information. There's so many good tips and there's lots of data in here that I didn't even cover, but what should somebody do once they read this?
This is when I explain this, I explain if there's one takeaway, you have to get involved. There's so much going on. These things are so important. There's so many people involved, and how much time do we spend, either at work or thinking about work, is that this is no longer somebody else's problem. You need to get involved. Everyone from, the CEO to person on the front lines, is there something you can do to affect these outcomes? What is it for you or your experience, and start there.
Jeff, where could people get this report? Do you have it published on the website?
It's published on the Deloitte website, and there's a QR code. So if they take an image of the QR code, all of the report will be available on their mobile device, but also they'll have access to the data. They can slice the data in different, by different segments in terms of geographies or businesses or sizes. So there's a lot of ways to actually interact with the data. And it's, of course, available on the website as well.
Awesome. Anything you want to point people to other than the report? Anything about you that you want to mention before we part ways?
No, I think, just the final thought is, in this is the best time to be in the people and work business, if that makes sense. So much is happening. So much is changing on a broad scale, on an economic scale, globally and socially. This is the time to kind of set the rules and set the practices and really have an impact for how things are going to happen moving forward. And so, from my perspective, in terms of HR, I cover HR research. This is the best time ever to be in HR. And so that to me, that means engage, get involved.
Well said. Jeff Mike from Deloitte, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. This is a lot of fun. And go get this report, listeners. It's so much good information in this.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Human Resources for Small Business podcast. Subscribe to this podcast and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to check out our blog at www.xeniumhr.com/blog and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn to hear about the latest in HR and leadership. The information on today's episode is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal or customized advice for you or your organization. This podcast is hosted and fully produced by Brandon Laws, that's me, and created and owned by Xenium Resources, Inc. For more information or to contact us, visit www.xeniumhr.com.